specifically in Kansas City, we had a really strong rental market in Oregon. And so we took a little bit of our relaxed policies and applied it to Kansas City when we first started getting out there in 2011. And what that did was really tanked us.
Welcome to the Good Stewards Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to seasoned real estate investors who want to maximize the cash flow potential in their business. We are buy and hold investors with 1,000+ properties and markets across the U.S. who bring an insider's view into the nitty-gritty details of real estate investing. If you're looking to develop the mindset, teams, and systems that can dramatically build your real estate business and net worth, you're in the right place.
Welcome to this episode of the Good Stewards Podcast. I'm Ryan Dossie.
I'm Amanda Perkins.
I'm Bill Sirius.
And I'm Andrew Sirius.
Today, we are going to cover best practices for leasing and screening that we use to manage our properties with our in-house property management staff. Before we dive in, just want to remind everyone that you can find us at thegoodstewards.com. Reach out and connect with us that way. So diving into this, part of our company mantra is that we manage all of our own properties. We found that works the very best for us. And over the years, we have stopped and started and tried a lot of different things, and it's gotten us to where we are today. And, so you get your good deal, you've got it rehabbed and you're ready to go to the market. What does that mean? What do you do next? For us, you're going to determine that you're going to rent the property. So what kind of rent are you going to assign to the property was probably a good place to start. Something we normally do is kind of test the market, see what everybody else is kind of renting like properties for. There's some websites. Ryan, don't you guys have a website you kind of go to?
Yeah, we use Rentometer, and then we'll also look at Zillow, nearby rentals, some Craigslist stuff. And with us, we always push it a little bit. If everybody else is getting $850, I'm like, why not $875?
We
haven't had a problem
do the same thing. And a lot of that for us, it just feels we're oftentimes bringing a better product to the market, and our price should reflect that. And, oftentimes, we're going after a certain resident. That's what we're looking for. And so, we want that price, and our properties reflect it. The other thing about that is you can always lower your price if you're not getting a good person. You're not finding somebody to rent your property, but it's hard to up it after you start low. So we always choose to start high.
And I'd say that's one of the most common mistakes is renting under market. And what renting under market does for you, it tends to cripple a buy and hold strategy, particularly if this is a common theme in your portfolio. You need those dollars to help you not only service your loan and your taxes and insurance and everything else, but also to move ahead and to improve your properties over time as well. So do not under rent your properties.
I would actually say the vast majority of properties we purchase off market at a discount, the number one thing they all have in common is they're under rented. So if you want to sell to us for pennies on the dollar, feel free to underprice your stuff.
Well, and I mean, the thing with that too is once you get somebody in there, you can only raise your rent, so much on somebody. Actually in Oregon, we have a rent control. It's pretty favorable at this point. I think it's a little over 10% after you add their 7% and some cost of living adjustments. But still, I mean, you maybe don't feel good about raising 10% annually. So it's good to just get it out there, get what you want. What we try to do is, we have a procedure with this. So we use Rent Links, which is
It's kind of like a syndicator.
Yeah, it's like a platform
listings
that we can put our properties on. It shoots it out to Zillow, apartments.com, I believe. Basically, I think around 15 or 20 websites that people go.
Everything but Craigslist.
Everything but Craigslist.
So put it on Craigslist yourself and Rent Links.
Right. And so, we spend the time to write a good description. We get really good quality photos of our properties so that they market themselves well. And, throw it out there, put a sign on the property. And another thing that we do is we utilize a company called Show Mojo. I think Kansas City uses it. No, you use Show Mojo as well. And that allows people to schedule showings online, which people like to be able to do without having to reach out and actually talk to someone these days. And if the property is vacant, if you're qualified, you can get a code and actually get into the property. So it actually limits who we have to send out.
Yeah.
So,
One of the things about that, Amanda, is that we haven't had a bad experience yet. So I think people think, oh my gosh, somebody's going to go into a vacant property without me being there. That could be a disaster. Well, I suppose that is possible, but they have figured it out. Rently is another company that does this. We have used Show Mojo primarily.
Rently is more expensive for the same thing.
Yeah, but it's been particularly if you're in a market in a metro area that you have properties that are in a very divergent geographical locations. This is going to be a huge time saver for you. So I'm a huge fan of Show Mojo.
And that works amazing when you have vacant properties that you're renting. But something that we do in Oregon and with our portfolio, because we've been managing it for 30 years now, we're doing a lot of pre-leasing. So most of our properties that are coming on the market are currently rented. Once we get our 30-day notice from the current resident, we're putting it on there. Or with our student population rentals, we spend a good chunk of the year marketing. And so a Show Mojo would work great for scheduling those showings. But if you're showing occupied properties, you need to make sure that you have staff there because you can't let strangers into an occupied house. But it works great in our markets that either new rentals coming online that haven't been rented before, or just maybe places that we haven't necessarily got the pre-leasing under our belt.
Show Mojo, it does one of the nice things, even with occupied properties. When you look at the schedule, a person can schedule, but they can't schedule that very day. They can schedule 24 hours later or so. Whenever your staff, whenever you set it up, that appointment could come in the calendar, you're ready to go if they schedule at that time. So they can schedule a occupied property. You just have to know your schedule and have it consistent with what you set up.
Well, I would say on kind of the topic of leasing, it's really important to have your leads go somewhere. If you're using something like Show Mojo, it may automate some of this stuff. But if you say you're on Craigslist, Zillow, and just have your phone number up there and you're getting phone calls and text messages, it's pretty easy to lose track of who's called in, who you've gotten back to, who you haven't. And, kind of like with sellers, we never know when the person we're going to buy from or the person that we're going to want in that property, the person who's a good fit for it, is going to call, right? So I would highly, highly recommend using some sort of a CRM, even if it's like a Google Sheet or Excel document of the address, who called, what the next step is, and when it's due. You have to work these leads the same way you do anything else. If you just wait for like the perfect person that happens to call when you happen to be available, who happens to be able to do a showing then, who happens to lease it, good luck. A lot of the times it's everybody else they're calling. I just looked for rental housing, so I'm super familiar with this. Like, nobody calls you back and nobody picks up live. So it's super frustrating as you're digging through looking for properties. People in your market are no different. So if you're not going to pick up live, make sure you're getting back to them in a timely manner. We had places that got back to us 2 weeks later that were like, hey, I just wanted to set up your walkthrough. And it's like, yeah, I live in a different house now. Like, I no longer need you. So just make sure that you're tracking those, that you're following up with people. One thing I would recommend, if you're using something like a Craigslist or like a Zillow, where there's just a phone number for them to call, right? Maybe it's a for sale or a for rent sign out front. There's a software called CallRail you can set up that will record all conversations. So somebody calls in, they're interested in renting from you. You can go back and listen to it and, oh yeah, okay, that's what happened on that call. So, if you're going to track it somewhere, great. at like a minimum, if you're not going to track it and just kind of like fly by the seat of your pants, I'd use something like CallRail, so you at least have a record of who called and what the conversation was.
Well, and that makes a good point
here. Ryan lives in San Diego, and if you're a property manager in San Diego, you can treat tenant prospects like absolute trash because there's, you have problems. So anywhere else, but in San Diego, you don't have to respond to anything.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in like a super hot market, cool. But at the same time, I will say as a caveat to that, we had a couple of places that we were interested in that reached back out to us that they were like, holy crap, you guys are 10 times more qualified than who we just signed a lease with. We had several places that were like, oh, well, I wish I would have talked to you yesterday, right? So, you never know who's calling and when. And like wife's military salary, I do well as an investor. We're really, really good applicants. The only reason we're not buying is we're probably only going to be here for about a year. But you never know who's calling. And later on, I'll hit on a story about that of property that took us 6 months to find somebody good.
Well, and another point with that is I'm speaking of our companies that we have several hundred units. And so we've, over the course of however many years, hired staff to handle this for us. So we're not out chasing down these leads, getting people in places. But if you're just starting out, your options are either to hire a property manager, which can be effective. You need to make sure you manage them, and then they would do this for you, or to handle it yourself until you can afford to hire somebody else. And you might be able to handle 20 on your own while trying to acquire property and oversee that. But at some point, you are going to have to hire somebody. We typically start with sort of like a catch-all, like an admin person that can do some property management with help, some bookkeeping with help, some leasing agent, and then kind of fill it in as our portfolio grows. But, if you're starting out, this is going to be you. So, you need to know, where am I going to find good quality residents? Well, online is the answer. And a lot of, apartments.com is effective. And like I said, we use Rent Links because it pushes out to everywhere. Previously, we've had a lot of success with Craigslist. That seems to be less of a place that we go, but we definitely still have active Craigslist ads just so that we're trying to find everybody that's looking, because people usually are searching the internet.
But don't forget your for rent sign in the front yard. They're cheap and simple, and you'll still get a small but reasonable percentage of your leads from them.
I will say on Amanda's note about hiring somebody, when you do, you still have to manage that person.
Yes.
Like, you want to watch your business just, absolutely fall apart, hire somebody, train them, and then just take your hands off. And that goes for acquisition, management, construction, any of that stuff. You still have to manage them, because at the end of the day, this is a job for them. This isn't their livelihood. This isn't their net worth. This isn't their future, right? So no maintenance guy, for the most part. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's like exceptionally rare human beings that do everything with 100% excellence. But for the most part, they're going to need some feedback. They're going to need some, hey, on this last one, I think we missed the mark a little bit. Here's what I want done differently on the next one. If you don't provide any oversight, I've noticed like quality of work, quality of leasing stuff starts to go down. And we experienced this firsthand in Indianapolis. Q1, we had a property manager that we ended up having to let go. And like stuff started to fall apart in the 90 days she was with us, because she wasn't working leads, was missing leasing appointments, was not following up with people. So when you have employees, you have to lead them.
I'm also a huge fan of having a good website, particularly as you grow. Our website is actually, we got the domain name in 1999, I think it was. So we've had it 20 years. One of the reasons is we caught on early is because we had students, and we realized, increasingly students were on the internet. Now, there's probably 99.9% of the students on the internet, and that number is rapidly getting close to that for just the population in general. So people are shopping online, and they're shopping for properties online. And if you have a good website that includes a lot of your, has your rental application, has co-signer agreements, has pet signer agreements,
maintenance request forms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And property management softwares can integrate into your website. So that's something you should look for as well.
Right. So early on, before maybe even you feel like you need it, think about putting together a website. And maybe Amanda could talk a little bit more to the software options that you'd have for property management, because you want to stop doing that with pen and pencil and paper very quickly. You
Well,
want to get
yeah,
into
I mean, one of the
software.
things that having that, we use Rent Manager, but if you're, I mean, I know that a lot of people have success with a lot of different things. We use Rent Manager because it's robust and we're in so many different markets that it's great for us. Um, but that, like that allows our management to, like from a bird's eye, you can look and see, what rents are being collected, how many applications are coming in, all of that sort of thing. Everybody has access to look at it. So you're sharing the same information. If you're starting out, you probably can do it. Maybe with an Excel spreadsheet and a pen and paper, but you're going to get to a point where you're not going to be wanting to keep all of that information in your head. And so, we store everything in our property management software, including our leases, our property pictures, notes. We run our service orders out. We run everything through our property management software.
The property management software that's really come on in the last few years is one called AppFolio. We don't use it because its accounting side is not as robust as Amanda was talking about as a Yardi or as a Buildium or as a Rent Manager, which is the one we do use. But the nice thing about AppFolio is it's got basically a built-in website. You can be up and running very quickly. They all kind of look the same. They've kind of figured it out. So if you're looking around for one, I would check that one out, particularly if you're not running hundreds of units.
It's a very nice platform. The user experience is really good. I will kind of touch on Amanda's kind of point here with using a property management software. And if you catch anything that I've said in this episode, do this right from the beginning. If you start out with like a composition notebook, Excel, you're trying to remember like, 342 needs a new, washer or whatever. Let's say you run an Excel spreadsheet and that's great. You do that for a while. And then you get to the point where you realize, okay, I want to switch over. Well, now you have 2 years of data on 20 properties that isn't
You're
going to
not going to manually
cleanly.
put in. So it is worth spending the money from the beginning. It's not that expensive.
In Kansas City, we had a hard time picking one because Eugene was on old property management software. And so I think we went from Excel to, I won't name them, but we went from one to another and then finally had a Rent Manager, which was a lovely project. So yeah.
How much fun was it to move around a whole bunch?
It was lovely, especially since you had to input everything. We didn't have very many properties though. At this point, I can't even imagine. I have heard of a property management company, a friend of ours who had well over 1,000 units switching property management softwares. Yeah. I mean, you have to leave like one portal open so you can get to the really old data, but that just transferring all of those residents from one software to the next is a nightmare. I don't even want to comprehend.
I think I just had a mini heart attack when you mentioned 1,000 units and switching software.
Yeah. They're
Life's
not
too
going to do it
short
for you.
to stress yourself out like that.
So I sort of mentioned, like when you're just starting out, pre-leasing isn't going to be a huge option for you, but it's something definitely to aspire to. And it's something that's been really effective for us in Oregon. And what that means really is, the minute we know a property is going to be available, whether we know a lease is ending or whether, a 30-day notice has been received, it immediately goes live at that point. And our project manager kind of assesses, maybe he's been in the property recently or something. He kind of assigns a date of availability. And what that means is it's going to be usually about a week or 10 days after the person moves out. He allows himself a window to get the property turned. And it really limits the days vacant, which really maximizes our rent potential. And also it gives us a deadline to strive for. If you don't have somebody trying to push themselves into moving into a property, it's not going to, you can be like, oh, well, you can let your contractor take an extra couple weeks or so. And so this has been really good for us to sort of establish the system and keep it going so that we can pre-lease.
Yeah, I want to make another plug here. There's a person named Jeffrey Lord. He runs Mr. Landlord, and he's done so at least 3 decades, I think. And if there's anybody who is all about pre-leasing, and all about not losing a day of rent. He has got this thing figured out. It's very impressive, and I'd encourage you to look his website up, and he's got lots of posts, lots of articles. You can buy into his boot camp, but MrLandlord.com, well worth
His
it.
name is Jeffrey Taylor, by the way.
I'm sorry, Jeffrey Taylor. It was Jeffrey Lord.
Jeffrey Landlord? I don't know.
So once you get your marketing out
Bill's alter
there
ego.
and you get your qualified applicants in, and actually you would do this beforehand, you need to establish some guidelines for your screening that you're going to stick to. And this is for two reasons. One is to protect yourself, but also so that you aren't violating fair housing laws. You need to treat everybody the same. Everybody has to meet the same criteria to lease your properties, or else you could set yourself up for a lawsuit down the line. You also need to make sure that you're following local and federal guidelines with what those screening requirements can be. Oregon seems to be pretty friendly towards tenants right now, just because we have a big, I think, homeless population is driving this. And so the state of Oregon is kind of making some guidelines about what our screening is, including criminal requirements and who you have to let in your properties and that sort of thing. You need to make sure that you know that information, because you can make all your own rules that you want. But if you're violating state and federal regulations, you're setting yourself up for a lawsuit down the line. I think you need to make 3.5 times the rent in order to be a resident. We have pet guidelines that you have to meet. One of our biggest things is previous rental experience. That's a huge indicator of how people are going to treat your properties or pay their rent to you, is based on what they've previously done. And so, that can be part of your screening criteria, and you want to make sure that you're following that up, reaching out to past landlords. Don't let that get away from you. We actually use a third-party service to do this for us. The applications come in, and then we push it out to a third-party screening so that they're contacting those landlords for us and running the background checks and verifying the income, because that kind of process is pretty time-consuming. And if you have, your staff are trying to show properties and market properties and run property management, they might not have time to chase down past work experience or collect their W-2s and their time cards, or their wage stubs, all of that, to make sure that they're verifiable. And then really stick to your guns. So once you start having your leads coming in, you got to get down to business and start screening applicants. And you want to, from the beginning, set yourself up with some strict guidelines and follow them. In our experience, it has worked better for us to leave properties empty than it does for us to put the wrong people into our properties. General rule we follow is 2 years of good rental history, meaning we reach out to landlords and verify that they paid their rent and paid it on time, kept up with their place, didn't damage at move out, and then 3.5 times the rent for an income. And that can be, that can be debatable on your area, or what works well for you. You need to keep in mind that you also need to follow state and local laws with regarding what is allowable and what meets criteria. And then what you need to do is make sure that you apply your screening criteria across the board. Everybody needs to be everyone has to meet the same set of criteria, and you can't make allowances for people who don't meet those criteria, or you could be subject to discrimination suits down the line.
That's even a good line to use too. Like, if somebody's like, "Oh, can you take a break for me? Oh, I'm really close. So I promise I can do it, or I got the money, or whatever." You can say, like, literally, like, these are our rules. It's we're not even allowed to make an exception, even if we wanted to.
And another
So
screening guideline, although again, check your state and local laws, but, we don't allow recent evictions. I think the state of Oregon is going to make us allow some of that, but that hasn't gone into effect yet. And, I think our guideline right now is within 10 years. And our thought with that is there's a lot of ways to avoid getting evicted. You can move out before the eviction takes place. But if you're willing to see it through to where you're getting removed by the court system once, you're likely going to do it again. And so it's just not something that we're wanting to allow. We use a third party to process a lot of our applications, to verify wages and reach out to past landlords, do that sort of thing. If you're doing it for yourself, you need to set up a system for it, because it's a lot of reaching out and waiting for follow-up, which is why we choose to use a third party to do it for us. Definitely costs money, but it makes the process a whole lot smoother. And, you're going to need to be reaching out to people along the way and letting them know the process, like where they are in the process, so that you're not processing 50 people for the same place. You kind of want to pre-screen them and make sure that they fit within your screening criteria. And then, that third party is just going to verify that all of that's legitimate and they were telling you the truth. We previously did make some allowances, specifically in Kansas City. We had a really strong rental market in Oregon. And so we took a little bit of our relaxed policies and applied it to Kansas City when we first started getting out there in 2011. And what that did was really tanked us, because, we were relying on our Oregon processes to save us in Missouri, and the laws were different and evictions took longer and all of that. And so what we really learned along the way is set your criteria and then just stick to them. Don't just 2 months of having vacant property, if you can't find a good quality resident, could save you thousands of dollars. Whatever it costs you, it will be worth it.
Yeah, with us, we don't even let people get into the make an exception conversations for me. We just they even start to well, no, but hey, unfortunately, legally, we have to stick to these guidelines for everyone to avoid lawsuits. Where people start to get into trouble is they start to listen to the story, and it's like, oh, geez, she's a single mom with 4 kids. Man, her ex-husband was an awful guy. And then it's like, well, you get into this, you don't even want to get down kind of that road or that path. We had a property that out of everything we own is probably maybe the only one that I regret buying. We only paid $35,000. It pulls in $1,200 a month. So I don't have any complaints on the cash flow side, but it literally took us 3-4 months to get somebody in there that made sense. I mean, we did dozens and dozens of showings and processed applications. And it's we had somebody that was like, oh, I can't believe you discriminate against drug dealers. Well, of course I discriminate against drug dealers, right? And, putting somebody in one of your rental properties is kind of like making a hire. You're not just looking for a beating heart. You're looking for somebody that meets your criteria. They're going to be a good fit long term, not just well, they've got the first month's rent and cash, so let's go, right? I love when complexes have those $400 moves you in. It's stuff with that building's probably not going super well,
right? I would say the only allowance we would make, which I don't think is an allowance, is if you don't have the wages or you don't have the rental history. We accept cosigners, but that's especially if you've never been in the rental market, we're going to allow that. If you have difficulties with your past rental situation, I don't think a cosigner in our situation is going to help you, because we still see, oh, well, you left a balance with your old landlord. If you're willing to do that, that means you're willing to do that to us. And people can change, but we don't need to be the people that see that through. So we don't always have to make allowances for that. So we're just going to wrap this episode up. I did want to turn it over to you a little bit, Ryan, because I know that you guys follow a different sort of a screening procedure than we're doing.
Yeah, so this is part of the fun of running a podcast. Even as one of the hosts, I'm learning new things. We follow kind of the same written procedures and policies, but we do all of our resident screening in-house, following up on job applications, contacting previous landlords, all that good stuff. So this is kind of new for me of like, wait a minute, we can get this piece off of our plate because as Amanda alluded to, it's not something that's fun. And I think I'm also now hearing that, Andrew, you guys use a company for yours as well?
Yeah, we use Red Star, I believe, and they do most of the screening stuff themselves. And we prefer to have it out of our own staff's hands, just so they can't be tempted to kind of push it in one direction or the other, based on whether they like the person or not. We want to make it as objective as possible. That's why we prefer to do it outsource it.
So it sounds like in the beginning, which I probably should have pushed this off our plate sooner, but it sounds like in the beginning, this is something that's important to kind of have a handle on. I think the only other thing I would touch on is make sure you understand legally how to decline an applicant, right? I think that's where you kind of run the risk of potentially getting into trouble, is saying something you shouldn't say of why you're not leasing to them, of like,
Right.
well,
And
we don't want kids in here.
Specifically, if you collect an application fee, it's just like if you get declined for a credit card. You have to decline them in writing and cite why, and it has to be something that tracks back to your written criteria for screening, so that you're following the letter of the law. That's very important.
That's the cover your rear piece of this episode.
Right.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up here. Obviously, property management is not the most sexy part of real estate investment. It is one of the things that gets overlooked the most, but it is essential. It's something you can't succeed at in the buy and hold model without doing very well, particularly the screening part, because bad residents can make your cash flow just disappear faster than just about anything. Anyways, please check us out, thegoodstewards.com. We very much thank you for joining us, and we will be back again next week. Thank you.